If you wanted to take forced patina on your dive watch to the next level, then this video might be for you because today I'm reviewing the Spinnaker Wreck. What's up, guys? Welcome to this episode of the Budding Watch Enthusiast. On this channel, we do watch reviews and discussions from the perspective of someone who hasn't been collecting for very long. So if that sounds interesting to you, please consider hitting the red subscribe button down below. So as I mentioned up top today, we're reviewing this Spinnaker Wreck dive watch that I have now had for the past couple weeks. I found this watch pretty interesting over these past couple of weeks. It's very much like a themed watch. Spinnaker is going for a very purposeful aesthetic with this watch, so we will talk about that in the review. We'll talk about how successful they are and really just how quality the watch happens to be and if it's something that you should be looking for as well. Before we do get into the review, I will mention up front, this watch was graciously donated to me by Spinnaker for the purposes of this review. So that's information that you can give as much weight as you want to. If you've been with the channel for a long time, you know that just because a watch gets loaned in doesn't mean that I pull any punches in the review. But again, you guys know that now going up front. So let's go ahead and switch perspectives, go down to the desk, and start checking out the nuts and bolts here of this Spinnaker Wreck. So let's dig into the Spinnaker Wreck here. We're going to start with the case. The case is made of stainless steel, the grade of which is not specified on the Spinnaker website, but I would assume that it's going to be 316L stainless steel. But it does have what is actually rose gold ion plating on the case. So it's not going to be that traditional silver finish except on the case back here. And of course, much like many of the other aspects on this watch, this ion plating, this rose gold, has been distressed by hand. Kind of the theme with the Spinnaker Wreck, the reason it's called the Wreck, is because Spinnaker wanted to make a watch that looks like it could have been fished out of the ocean after sitting in a shipwreck for several decades. And you're going to see that, hand distress theme on many parts of the watch as we go throughout the review. Now, the sides on the case here are a little bit rounded. As you can see, it kind of reminds me, it's a little bit reminiscent to me of the Seiko SKX case, the way the sides kind of bubble out. Maybe not as pronounced as you see on the SKX. The screw-down exhibition case back on the back here has some of the literature for the watch, as you can see. It also lets you check out this custom Spinnaker rotor on the back of the Seiko NH35 movement that powers this watch. If we flip it over here, you do have a screw-down crown that is signed with the Spinnaker sail logo. However, a bit of a curious thing about this watch, even though it is a dive watch and it has a screw-down case back and it has a screw-down crown, only 100 meters of water resistance. I definitely did find that a little bit peculiar about this specific watch. So the dimensions, this is a big watch. It's funny because Spinnaker actually classifies this as a medium-sized watch on their website. Of their 4 sizes that run up to extra large, this is a medium-sized watch, even though it has a width of 43 millimeters on the case, a lug-to-lug distance of 50 millimeters, a height of 13 millimeters, and a strap width of 22 millimeters. So let's go ahead and take a look at this dial here. We're actually going to start with the bezel. So we have a 90 click unidirectional diving bezel. It does have a little bit of backplay on it as well, with this green aluminum insert on this version of the Wreck. And again, as you can see, especially if we get around the 40 marker here and really around the entire bezel as a whole, it is hand distressed to again have that Wreck aesthetic that much of the watch has. And if we also look at the green dial, you see that texturing as well that's on the dial, and it's kind of the same aspect. This dial has been scratched, it's been etched and hand distressed, again, much like all of the other aspects of the watch. Now, that's pretty much all the aspects of the watch that have been purposely hand distressed. They didn't do it with the hands or the crystal or the markers because they still wanted the time telling to be as legible as possible. You do see these unframed and loomed hour markers that are around the dial with numerals here at 6 and 9. You have a triangle up here at 12 for orientation's sake. And of course, breaking that up, you see at 3 o'clock here this rose gold plated date window that matches the aesthetic of the case. You can see that half rail minute track that runs along the outside edge of the dial. You do actually have an applied Spinnaker text branding here at 12 o'clock on the dial, and then the relevant literature on the rest of the watch, a little bit lower down at 6. And keeping the metal of the watch consistent, the loomed hands are framed in that rose gold plated steel, much like the rest of the watch. Of course, the big arrow minute hand, and then the smaller blade style hour hand you see there. The lollipop seconds hand that you see traveling around the watch is going to be orange, just for a nice little pop of color. It also matches the depth rating that you see on the front of the dial. And topping off the dial is this flat, slightly raised mineral crystal that sits on this watch. I guess that might contribute to the slightly lower depth rating. So I mentioned powering this watch is a Seiko NH35 movement. That movement runs at 21,600 vibrations per hour, as you can tell by the slightly slower sweep of the seconds hand. It has about 40 hours of power reserve into it. This movement, of course, does feature hacking, hand winding, bidirectional winding, and a quick set date. Now, the movement's rated between minus 20 plus 40 seconds per day. The one that it happens to be in this watch is actually running phenomenally. It's one of the best movements in my box right now, running at minus 0.3 seconds per day. Again, that is exceptional. It's not what I would expect. If you buy this watch, I wouldn't just expect every NH35 movement that these ship with to be running at that precise of a speed. But I got lucky, I guess. Mine is really good. And I guess you could achieve that through regulation as well. Now, as far as the strap this watch comes on, you have this very thick, chunky green leather strap that actually is patinaing as much as the rest of the watch comes patinaed, essentially. It's got a little bit of stitching here, cream-colored stitching at the top and at the bottom of the watch as well. The buckle on here is the same, again, rose gold ion-plated steel. It is signed with the Spinnaker branding. And despite being merely a medium-sized watch, it still fits terrifically well on my 8-inch wrist. Of course, it's going to. Again, 43 millimeters. I have no problem pulling off that size. Now, interestingly, I will say, despite the fact that the height is kind of reined in a little bit on this watch, despite the fact that the lug-to-lug distance is long for most people, this watch does wear large. That might be a byproduct of me lately, just having bought a lot of really thin dive watches, so I might be just kind of have recency bias in terms of having thinner watches on my wrist. But to me, it wears large. It is a consideration that you have to make. And again, 43 millimeters in width, you'll know whether or not your wrist size is going to be compatible with a watch of that size. But here's what it looks like. Again, I have an 8-inch wrist, so you can compare by scale for what your wrist would be when you're wearing the Spinnaker Wreck. So look, talking about the Wreck, we have to kind of address the elephant in the room first with this watch, and that is the Wreck aesthetic. Honestly, nothing else I say in this review is going to matter much to you if you don't already kind of dig the, stressed patina, the forced patina look of this watch. If you're not into that aesthetic, if you think it's silly, if you think it's a little gimmicky, you're not going to like this watch, because obviously that's a huge aspect of the design of the watch. It's kind of the thing that makes the watch what it is in a lot of ways. And I will say this, whether you like it or not, smaller brands, and Spinnaker's not a micro brand, but they are a smaller independent brand, often get a lot of flack because a lot of their designs can often be inspired by famous watch designs in the past. Spinnaker certainly is a company that does that as well. I will say a lot of their other watches are clearly inspired by other more famous designs. So I'm always going to laud a company for taking such a bold stance with the design of a watch, for taking a watch that is going to be as polarizing as this watch is inevitably going to be, and applaud them for doing it in the first place. So like I said, I commend them for going with such a bold design that I know is not going to appeal to everybody. Now for me, I actually kind of appreciate the nature of it. I kind of appreciate the kind of quirky, kitschy, feel of having this, what's essentially like a concept watch or a themed watch. I'm actually into it. Where I'm disappointed is I think that they picked the wrong style of watch to do this with. I think that this like shipwreck theme watch would have worked way better if you had done this with a watch that has more vintage design cues, a watch that might be more inspired by vintage watches of the past. And the funny thing is, Spinnaker has those watches in their catalog. They could have easily taken like the Spinnaker Fleece or however you pronounce that and kind of done this aesthetic, and I think it would have been way cooler. Like I said, they said they wanted to make a watch that looked like it was fished out of the ocean after decades of sitting in the bottom of the sea. But the biggest problem that I have with the watch is that the actual design of the watch, the actual aesthetic design of the watch itself, just feels very modern to me, especially with the the thicker numerals and font on the bezel, the way that the markers are kind of laid out, the font on them as well, the hands especially. The hands are probably the biggest culprit, honestly. Like, they're the things that make the watch look more modern. I would have liked to see maybe some thinner hands, maybe a bit more angular design, a bit more contrast between the hour and minute hand, even though the minute does have that giant arrow pointing out of it. I think changing the hands would have gone a long way to kind of making the watch feel a little bit more charming with this aesthetic. And I think the dial is gorgeous. I think the patterning on the dial looks terrific. Patterned dials often look very cool just because, again, they're different than the matte or gloss finish that you often see in a lot of dials out there. And I think that this was executed really well. It gives the watch a look that's truly unique because it's distressed by hand. Obviously, your Spinnaker Wreck is going to look slightly different than other Spinnaker Wrecks that are out there as well. And again, I kind of like it on the bezel too. It's a little bit more overt on the bezel, again, especially down here at the 40. I think this is a little harsh. I think the way they have it done, you see around the 20 here, around the 10, where it's a little bit lighter and not quite as obvious, is probably the way that I would have liked to see it done. I feel like doing it the way they did it around the 40 is just to show you, hey, look, guys, we really did distress this by hand. It's very obvious. And I kind of like the subtlety that you see on the rest of the bezel, but I think the dial and bezel combination are easily the most attractive parts of this watch. And again, the case, I think, is done really well as well. And again, these aspects of it, the distressing aspects, could have come off as really gimmicky. And I know there's a lot of people watching this video, and you're going to hear them in the comments down below, that are going to say that, hey, this is super gimmicky. But I still think that they didn't go, with the exception of what I just pointed out there in the bezel, I don't think that they went overboard doing this. And I think they could have. I think they really could have exaggerated it and made it look really goofy. But I think the way that they did pull it off works really well for what they were going for. And so, like I said, I think the distressing elements, with a few small exceptions here and there, were really tastefully done and not too glaring in my eyes. Then we come back to some of just kind of the oddities of the watch. Again, 100 meters water resistance, I think with the watch, especially where you have a screw down crown and case back, is a little unacceptable in the market. And it's funny that we say that that's unacceptable because 99.999% of people are going to be totally fine with 100 meters of water resistance. Like, you're never going to need it. I'm certainly never going to need any more than that. But I don't know. I feel like it's a mark against the watch in this day and age right now. If a watch like this doesn't carry at least 150 to 200 meters of water resistance, again, it is a dive watch, and it is a watch that they're saying, hey, this could have been on the bottom of the sea floor for decades and years. So I feel like the water resistance, you want to bump that up. And again, the 90 click bezel, that's just odd to me. Either make it 60 or make it 120. 90 clicks is weird because the triangle will only perfectly line up with the even numbered hour markers. If you try to line it up perfectly with the odd numbered marker, like you see here at the 9, it's going to be slightly before and slightly after. You can't get it right on there. So again, 60 or 120 clicks, I think, would have been the way to go. The leather strap that comes on here is of decent quality. I don't think it's a strap that you're going to be begging to pull off the watch and pair with your other watches. It's fine, what you would expect from a watch at this price point. And speaking of this price point, this watch does come in at $280, and I think that's a great price. You're getting a good value in that price with the Seiko NH35 movement that's going to perform very reliably for you. And again, the things that you're missing, you're not getting a sapphire crystal, you're not getting framed hour markers, though I would have liked to see that, but those things are understandable when you're paying a sub $300 price for a watch like this. So, like I said, personally, the Wreck is not for me, and I think it would have been right up my alley if the watch just had more vintage design cues. I like quirky designs. I like watches that are unique, and I like watches that are trying to tell kind of their own story and do their own thing. You guys, if you been with the channel for a while, know that I did enjoy like the Balticus watches that I got in a couple of months ago and reviewed on here as well. I thought they were really cool, and I think it just would have been a little bit more charming if it was the vintage style, because I actually like the distressed aesthetics of the watch. I kind of like that a lot. The watch just feels too modern. Like I said, I wanted something that maybe had a little bit of a thinner bezel, that had a little bit more classic looking hands on the watch. That would have made me appreciate this Wreck a little bit more. That said, what I have learned from this watch is that Spinnaker is a great brand to look at if you're looking for a solid quality watch, sub $300 for most of their watches. That's not going to be like your typical Seiko or Orient watches. I think they have a lot of different varieties to choose from on their site. There's a lot of other watches like the Hall or the Floyce that were a little bit more appealing to me, that if I was buying this personally, those are probably the watches that I would lean towards. The Wreck is a really cool concept watch. Again, I think it's built well, and I think it's of decent quality. But again, the aesthetic is going to determine whether you like this watch. So if you're looking for something, a sports watch or a diver that's a little bit more quirky, a little bit more off the beaten path, definitely check out the Spinnaker Wreck if you can get down with this aesthetic. But if not, I mean, just check out Spinnaker's watches in general. I mean, I had seen reviews on their watches before and just could never be sure of the quality. Now that I've gotten one in my hands, I can tell you the quality is up to snuff. As long as they have something that you like aesthetically, it seemed like a great brand to check out. So thank you so much for Spinnaker for sending this watch in, for gifting it to the channel for the purposes of review. I really appreciate it and definitely enjoyed my time with the Spinnaker Wreck. And thank you guys for watching this as well. If you found it informative, hit the like button down below. And also, if you think someone else would find the video informative, feel free to share it out on social media or on forums so that other folks can check it out too. Subscribe to the channel and ring the bell icon. Go ahead and give me a follow on Instagram as well if you want to follow me on the daily. And again, thanks so much for watching this. I will see you all the next time.